I just had an incredibly eventful couple of months working from Cusco as a digital nomad. And in the meantime, I got to experience how life truly goes in this traditional Peruvian city. So today, I'll share my experience with local restaurants, accommodation, and even healthcare. Plus, I'll also answer questions whether or not this city is suitable for remote working. Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. YouTube is packed with videos about Peruvian touristy stuff like Machu Picchu, Rainbow Mountains, and these cute fluffy alpacas. However, nobody really talks about how life actually is in Cusco, especially not from a digital nomad's perspective. And spoiler alert, you might find this video a little pessimistic, but in my experience other YouTubers who upload about Cusco say some things that are genuinely not true, and at the same time they completely hide the ugly things that I'm about to expose. First and foremost, you need to know that Cusco takes place high up in the Peruvian mountains, so when I first arrived, altitude sickness was patiently waiting for me at the airport, and this climate made my first couple of days quite miserable. I had headache, I felt dizzy, and my energy level was all over the place. So right at the beginning, any kind of intellectual work was pretty much impossible, and I couldn't keep up with my deadlines. Later, this productivity issue only got even worse due to Cusco's slow and unstable internet. The first two Airbnbs I tried practically had no connection at all, so I had to sit in cafes all day, which would have been fine anywhere else on planet Earth, except in Cusco, where most places don't really like remote workers and have a strict 30-minute time limit on their Wi-Fi. On top of all this, I also had a big problem with mobile data, and even though I tried SIM cards from most Peruvian carriers, my internet remained painfully slow. So for someone who has to download, edit and re-upload large files, Cusco wasn't exactly a fun place to be. Another big challenge I had to face is that I couldn't purchase electronics of adequate quality, since local shops offer only the cheapest, lowest quality import brands, so I had to accept that if any of my stuff breaks or gets stolen, I can't buy a replacement. However, good news is that crime in Cusco is much less serious compared to other Peruvian cities such as Lima, and even the weirdest neighborhoods turned out to be pretty safe. I remember that at the first glance Cusco looked really dangerous, as 90% of the houses are unfinished and the streets are also packed with stray dogs. But over time I just simply got used to this, and I had only 2 incidents when I had to knock people out. I also got scammed only just once when a local tour guide disappeared with my $300. But in the grand scheme of things, it was really not that big of a deal, because I got it all on camera and turned it into a video. On a global scale, the accommodation in Cusco is very affordable, but based on what I get for my money, I think it's still overpriced. Right now I live in a relatively modern 2-bedroom apartment, and without exaggeration, I think it's one of the nicest buildings in the whole city, which costs me a little over $1,000 a month. My host Miguel and his daughter Yaida are also the nicest people I met in town, and before I moved here, my stay was a lot more painful. This is my 6th place that I rented from Airbnb, and after seeing these many apartments, I figured that they all have very similar problems. Generally speaking, Peruvians are not familiar with the concept of heating, and showers also run out of hot water after 2 minutes. Which is not so funny when the temperature drops below 0 during the night inside your house, because the only way not to freeze is staying in bed rolled up in blankets. And this comes from a guy who's always the last in the group who complains about cold. For me personally, the lack of quality food is a much bigger sustainability issue anyway, and it's true that Peruvians have some of the coolest recipes in South America, but they also have some of the worst hygiene. So every time I go to a restaurant, I gamble on food poisoning. On top of all that, the Cusco area famously suffers from mercury contamination, so I would also avoid drinking tap water or eating food that was cooked in tap water. At this point, I feel like I've tried all of the best restaurants in town, and I can only mention 2 places where I would eat again. So I genuinely don't understand the hype when it comes to food, and I mostly just end up cooking at home. This city is also very famous for its markets, like San Pedro, where you also have the option to sit down and try some food. However, after having a walk around these places, I genuinely don't recommend any of them, because their smell is simply unbearable. Cusco also hosts so-called Saturday markets, when merchants from the whole region swarm the city, and an entire district turns into a giant marketplace. And even though at first glance these markets looked very interesting, I found these Saturday markets rather annoying instead of useful, because they mostly sell raw meat full of bugs. And eventually, if local food makes you sick, you are in big trouble, because South America is not really famous for their cutting-edge medicine. There's a running joke in local culture that if you need to visit a doctor in Cusco with one disease, you'll come home with 5. Which doesn't sound very promising. Close to the city center, I found an incredibly funny street where literally every single house is either a pharmacy or an optometrist. So that is a pharmacy, that is a pharmacy, that is a pharmacy, that is another pharmacy, that's a fourth pharmacy, fifth. So there are at least 20 drugstores within 100 meters, yet accessing even the most basic medication in this town is very difficult, since most of these pharmacies sell only lipstick, diapers or soft drinks, and also none of the optometrists could get me a pair of contact lenses either. All these things put together make Cusco a very uncomfortable place for a longer stay. I had a couple of fun moments taking day trips to Vinicunca, Umantai or to the Sacred Valley, but after I ran out of options, the whole city got super annoying. And it's generally true for me. If I have to deal with bad things, I try to find ways to forge them into opportunities. For example, I solved the problem of extremely cold nights by getting this very cool poncho that I use every day. Or when my internet died, I used it as an opportunity to get outside and go on dates, because local girls were pretty cool actually. But this doesn't change the fact that Cusco was a big setback for me, and if I knew that it looked like the way it does, I wouldn't have spent so much time here. I know that from pictures, Cusco looks fantastic, but IRL, I don't think that this city is as breathtaking as many people say. Probably the overwhelming majority of YouTubers lie about Cusco because they wanna sound exciting, to clickbait more viewers or satisfy their sponsors. But my video is not sponsored by anyone, so I can be perfectly honest and say that in my opinion, Cusco is not a nice city, and I would definitely not settle down here. There are a couple of okay places, like the main square, which is genuinely beautiful and well maintained, but after you leave the immediate proximity of Plaza de Armas, things turn ugly very quickly, and in general Lima is a much nicer place to stay. So if you have a Peruvian trip ahead of you and you're trying to evaluate how to split up your days, I suggest spending more time in Lima. If you'd like to see my video about the Peruvian capital city, make sure you click on this card to learn more about it. Thank you for sticking around all the way, and I'll see you in the next one.